might actually look like for, the average person.
And this was all sparked by that pretty fiery debate on the Diary of the CEO.
Yeah,
Right?
that's the one. Our source material today is straight from that YouTube transcript.
Okay.
And our mission, really, for you listening, is to try and cut through all the noise, extract the key insights, the really different points of view on why you might be feeling the pinch economically.
And explore the potential paths ahead.
Yeah, without getting bogged down in complex economic jargon or, taking sides.
Got it. Well, what's immediately striking about this debate is how sharply it focuses on a tension that I know is on a lot of people's minds.
Which tension is that?
Well, you've got this self-made entrepreneur, someone who's lived the reality of building wealth, going toe-to-toe with an economist who brings a much broader systemic view to the same problems.
Okay, so let's jump straight into that first big clash, John. The fundamental question. Why does the average person in the UK or America maybe feel like they're financially worse off?
Yeah, is it? Is it a lack of that go-getting entrepreneurial spirit?
Or they're bigger, more ingrained issues? Systemic stuff?
Well, the economists in the discussion, they didn't hesitate, pointed straight to those larger factors.
Like what specifically?
Things like the size of government, historically high taxes, maybe a schooling system that's not quite fit for purpose anymore.
Okay.
The huge influence of technology, and of course the shift to remote working, all cited as big contributors.
But then you had a really different angle coming in, didn't you? Focusing hard on wealth inequality.
Yeah, the argument there is pretty direct, isn't it? If the wealthiest keep getting wealthier faster,
It squeezes everyone else.
it inevitably puts a squeeze on resources, opportunities for the middle class, for those trying to get by. Think about housing affordability, for example.
Right, so it's less about individual effort in that view and more about the whole system.
Exactly. The overall economic environment, how resources are actually distributed, that becomes central to understanding why some folks feel left behind, no matter how hard they work.
And here's a detail that jumped out at me, this statistic about millionaires leaving the UK.
Oh, yeah, that was surprising. About 1,000 a month, they said.
1,000 a month. And the worry voiced was, well, if these high earners leave, does the tax burden just get heavier for everyone else?
Yes, the concern. So for listeners, the takeaway isn't just, oh, rich people are moving. It could actually impact public services, infrastructure, healthcare.
Depending on how governments react to maybe a smaller tax base.
Precisely.
But maybe the most sobering moment in that first part was a prediction from one participant, someone who actually made money betting against Western society.
Right. His belief is that the extreme inequality we see in, say, South Africa or Nigeria isn't just possible, but is actually the direction the UK and US are heading.
Wow. And he's actively betting on that future.
That's what he said, positioning his investments to profit from it.
Okay. That really injects a sense of urgency, doesn't it?
Definitely. It's not just abstract economics anymore. It's about potentially huge shifts in how our societies work.
Yeah.
Shifts that would affect everyone listening.
Let's move to the second key area then, entrepreneurship and technology. This is where the self-made entrepreneur's personal story really came through.
Yeah. He talks about growing up in a low-income area, high unemployment, and how he carved his own path, specifically through starting businesses.
And he's successful now.
Very. Leading fast-growing software companies, other ventures. His perspective is rooted in that lived experience, Not inherited wealth. It's a powerful story of individual drive.
But The Economist offered a counterpoint, right? Acknowledged the individual success, sure, but talked about a tale of two cities in the UK.
Exactly. For some, maybe those in the booming digital economy, things look good. Prosperity.
But for others.
For a big chunk of the population, the reality is rising costs. Energy, housing, food. Just the basics getting harder to afford.
So the economic experience isn't the same for everyone.
Not at all. While some sectors flourish, many others are facing a really tough landscape where just keeping up is a struggle.
This brought up the idea of the Economic Freedom Index.
Right. The argument being that countries making it easier to start and grow businesses, high economic freedom, they tend to have lower poverty overall.
So fewer regulations, maybe lower taxes, strong rule of law, that kind of thing.
That's the idea. Fewer barriers could mean more opportunity, better economic well-being for more people.
And then technology. The point was made that tech, while powerful, isn't necessarily a rising tide lifting all boats.
No, it might actually be creating a divide, disproportionately rewarding those in online tech-focused sectors.
So connecting that to listeners, you might see this in the job market. Certain tech skills are super valuable, high salaries,
potentially leaving others feeling like they're on a completely different track.
which led to a really practical question. Okay, say someone quits their job, retrains for tech. Can they reasonably expect financial security?
And the answer seemed to be, well, it's complicated. Housing costs loom large.
Ah, the affordability crisis. That's the kicker.
It is. A tech job might pay more, sure. But if you live somewhere with crazy high housing costs, a huge chunk of that extra cash just disappears. Makes real security much harder to nail down.
They gave that stark example, didn't they? A father buying a house years ago for what seems like peanuts now.
Compared to its million-plus value today.
Yeah.
And while rising house prices are global, the UK has this specific issue, described as a housing traffic jam.
Meaning?
Older homeowners often staying put in large family homes, even after kids have left, which ties up housing stock.
And that links directly to wealth distribution across generations.
Absolutely. In the UK, a huge slice of housing wealth is held by baby boomers. That inevitably affects younger generations trying to get onto the property ladder, build their own wealth.
Which then raised that fundamental question. Is it okay if young people today might just never own significant assets?
And interestingly, all three participants, despite their differences, agreed. No, that's not okay.
But they disagreed on the solutions.
Completely. But that shared concern itself is significant. It highlights this deep unease about a widening generational wealth gap and what that means long-term for society.
Okay, third point. Wealth creation versus wealth extraction, and of course, taxes.
Yeah, this distinction is really key. Wealth creation, think innovation, new products, new services, generating new value.
Like inventing a useful app.
Exactly. Wealth extraction, on the other hand, that's more about deriving wealth from existing resources, maybe financial trading, rent seeking.
The entrepreneur was pretty clear where he stood, wasn't he?
Very. Argued his wealth came from creating totally new value through his businesses. Not a zero-sum game where his gain is someone else's loss. He sees it as expanding the whole economic pie.
Benefiting employees, customers, the wider economy.
That's his perspective.
But the economist countered that, for many people, the lived experience feels like wealth is being extracted, pulled from the middle and working classes at an alarming rate.
Yeah, that view focuses more on maybe the concentration of economic power. Our current system structured in a way that benefits a few while straining the majority.
And this disagreement naturally led straight into a debate about tax policy.
Oh, yes. This is where their core philosophies really clash. The entrepreneur argued lower economic freedom caused by high taxes, lots of regulation ultimately makes people poorer on average, less dynamic economy.
He even pushed back on that idea of the 50s post-war boom being purely down to high taxes working well. Mentioned rationing was still around.
Well, context is crucial there, isn't it? The post-war era had unique conditions rebuilding, labor shortages that don't map directly onto today.
The conversation also touched on current UK government spending being a huge chunk of GDP.
And much of it funded by borrowing, by debt, which raises long-term sustainability questions, obviously.
Meanwhile, the economists advocated strongly for shifting the tax burden.
Right. Cut taxes on working people, increase taxes on the wealthiest?
Based on the idea that the current system might be unfair, and those with the most should contribute more.
That's the principle. But then the counter-argument immediately came back.
The millionaire exodus. If you tax the wealthy too much, they'll just leave.
Exactly. That worry about losing high earners and the tax revenue they bring, it's a key challenge for governments.
Yeah.
Finding that balance between fairness and, well, keeping the tax base intact.
The entrepreneur then asked, okay, if you raise taxes on the wealthy, what government spending gets cut?
Which highlights the tough choices, right?
Uh-huh.
Fiscal policy is all about trade-offs. Increase taxes here, maybe you need to cut spending there, or borrow more.
Then the economist critiqued the current system's fairness, pointing out someone might pay a lot of income tax.
While huge amounts of inherited wealth might face less immediate tax, raising questions about how we treat different types of wealth accumulation.
And the practical difficulties of taxing wealth itself came up too.
Oh yeah, how do you value and tax digital assets? What about companies shifting profits to places like Luxembourg?
Right, the profit shifting.
And the huge challenge of taxing unrealized wealth, gains wealth that's grown on paper but hasn't been sold yet. These are big practical hurdles.
The entrepreneur also voiced concern about being labeled anti-wealth.
Yeah, arguing that if taxes get too high, You just discourage people from building businesses in the UK in the first place. It's about incentives for innovation.
And finally, that millionaire exodus point came back again, linked potentially to recent tax changes.
Specifically, the end of the non-domicile scheme. Evidence suggesting a noticeable uptick in high net worth individuals leaving. It shows how sensitive mobile capital can be to policy shifts.
Okay, so final point. Solutions and the future outlook, where do they land?
Well, their contrasting views led to very different proposals, as you'd expect. The economist's main solution: shift the tax burden.
Tax wealth holders more, wealth creators and workers less.
Essentially, yes, and clamp down hard on corporate profit shifting. Make sure global companies serving UK-US customers actually pay taxes there.
Whereas the entrepreneur solution was almost the polar opposite.
Increase economic freedom, lower taxes, less regulation, pointing to places like Singapore, Ireland, Switzerland as models.
So a fundamental disagreement about the role of government in creating prosperity.
Absolutely.
The discussion then looked at the different economic performance, US versus UK recently.
Yeah, US showing stronger GDP growth, higher GDP per head, better stock market performance, leading to debate. Is this because of their different approaches to government spend and policy?
It's complex, obviously. Many factors involved.
For sure. But the data does show a divergence, prompting those questions.
And remote working came up again. The risk of British jobs moving overseas.
Driven by tech, enabled by remote work, jobs potentially going to lower cost countries. That has big implications for the job market here. More competition, maybe downward pressure on wages for some roles.
They briefly touched on taxing billionaires directly.
Acknowledging how hard that is. Implementation challenges, the risk of them just leaving.
Right. And there was talk about making the UK a better place for tech companies to grow. Why aren't we seeing UK versions of the US Magnificent Seven or AI leaders?
Yeah. Is it access to capital?
Yeah.
Talent pool?
Yeah.
The regulatory environment? Questions about fostering that high growth tech sector.
And the debate circled back to whether entrepreneurship, despite the success stories, is a realistic path out of poverty for most people.
Contrasting those individual triumphs with the bigger systemic challenges, that feeling that the lifeboat of opportunity might be shrinking for many.
So, different views again on the main cause of wealth inequality. System flaws versus lack of individual initiative.
Exactly, which naturally leads to different solutions.
And finally, they both offered advice for young people navigating all this.
The economist basically said, be aware the situation might be getting tougher, manage your finances carefully, and advocate for systemic change, especially taxing the wealthy more.
And the entrepreneur.
Focused on personal agency. Get valuable skills for the new economy, especially online stuff, tech, and seriously consider entrepreneurship. Despite the risks, take control yourself.
So, two quite different messages there.
Both emphasizing the need to be informed and proactive, though, just in different ways.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, it feels like the core tension is this fundamental disagreement, right? What's the primary driver of economic hardship? Is it individual failings or systemic problems?
And that directly shapes the proposed solutions. Either empower individuals more through free markets, or reform the system through things like wealth taxation.
And the outlooks are starkly different, too. One predicts increasing hardship from inequality.
The other emphasizes opportunity, especially in tech and entrepreneurship, if the environment is right, meaning more economic freedom.
So for everyone listening, the key takeaways seem to be, well, first, the complexity. The economic landscape is intricate.
Definitely. And there are genuinely different, deeply held views on wealth creation, taxation, the role of government.
Plus, these global trends, remote work, tech advancements, they're not going away. They will impact our financial futures.
Which leads us to that final thought, maybe, for listeners to ponder. Considering these different arguments, these different analyses,
What specific actions might you take in your career, your finances, how you engage with these broader economic debates?
and what new questions do you have now about where the economy's heading, about potential policy changes? It's definitely worth digging deeper into these topics and the experts' views.